I see that we're streaming in live, so we're ready to go. Maybe we'll just do a sound check with Geshe.
Oh, yeah, Tashi Dele Kanga.
Can everyone hear Geshe all right? Okay, that's
Yep,
good.
it's good.
Yes, me.
Oh, Jisungi.
Oh, yeah, Tashiro Kanga Tashi Dele, Tane Kanga Devo, the keyboard, Tane, Tai, Yapo, Doshio, Vitavayos.
So first of all, Tashidele, greetings to all of the Dharma friends. Geshe hopes that everything's going well and he hopes that you're all happy.
Oh, Ta, Tanichire, Tane Tanganzo, the Nichin Ruzoya, the Tasso Soso Poge, Tende Poge, Karsek, say Ajituel, Petubachi, Tende Zogi, Sombata, Te Alevika, Chimboisares.
So our gathering today, it's good if we start with a motivation, and at minimum, the motivation that we can bring forth is I will definitely try to apply these instructions so that I can improve my mind.
Oh, Rurichineta, Nishi was on my imbata, Rososo, Nikado, Tatu, Shawa, Karele, Inayota, Roje Kangite, Posubachilla, Petuchi, Unkuyares.
And when we do this, we establish not only the causes for both temporary and ultimate happiness, but those causes are established for ourselves, and we can also dedicate those causes to others.
Oh, Ta Nielegita, Jel Niele to Lechi, Jetso Niares. Tinunita, Nieleg, Jetso, the Savenda Wate, Tasso, Rusoso, Tapagelo, Daniel, Jetso, the Teres.
And so for success in this, we can talk about different types of causes in Buddhism, right? And one of the causes that we talk about is the substantial cause, right? And the substantial cause is kind of the most significant one. So the substantial cause of us being successful in this motivation is, of course, our own study and practice. But along with that, we also have subsidiary causes.
Penata, shallow sheet, and Epo to Salumado, that Yapo Niatina, Cosavetella, Anita, Genio, Bachibares.
So if we think, for example, of apple trees or orange trees, we can think of the substantial cause of each of these as the particular apple seed or the orange seed.
Oh, Nipo Candicina, and the Gicandicina, Genio, but the Chibares.
Again?
Genio, but Nipo Candicina.
Yes. And so however the apple or the orange trees manifest, we understand that their nature is based upon the substantial cause of that particular seed.
Jetso tell Nielegja. And it Jetso Mayimba, tell Ropashik, tell Legislature.
But along with that substantial cause, which is the particular seed, we have along with that all of the different subsidiary causes.
Oh, that's terrible, she Chesuchi de. Don't the Carina, Tomoto Jicila Tenishore, Sedate, that no Chimbochi is that tell you Ramoyares.
And so from our perspective, for example, when we speak about the researchers in the field of science, one of the kind of critiques that we would make from the Buddhist perspective is that they are positing that the universe and the world can be traced from one initial cause. And we would argue that that's simplistic.
Oh, tan zombali inare, Aneta Mayinare, Tandoinare, that Koine Candicina. Nipo Candicina, Genil Latin Yogibatata, so Gires.
Oh, so when we speak about the world, when we speak about human beings, when we speak about animals, also when we speak in general about samsara, or a cyclic existence, we can't just speak about it from that sort of one substantial cause. We also need to speak about all of those subsidiary or auxiliary causes.
Oh, that zombie Kangaseri Pachosona, tell she that she to Toya Mebachines.
Kunto mebasana?
Genio Batala.
Gyunisana lenke gigyu. I'm getting it pretty early on today. So in fact, Geshe is saying that if all of the scientists kind of gathered together, he doesn't feel that that they could refute this kind of objection, right? That it can't just be one cause, a substantial cause, but that we also have to consider the auxiliary cause or causes.
Oh, that Jenny de Jatoba in a Carolina, and Deshe Jatoba, don't Tanes Kangalata, just
When we think of both the substantial cause and the auxiliary cause, what that allows us to do is it allows us to really explain the kind of arising of any phenomena, right? So this is an advantage of the Buddhist perspective that Geshe is giving you. And so then, of course, when we speak about our task here, which is to develop these positive minds, these positive mental qualities, then we also need to think from the point of view of these two types of causes, right? So as we said, the substantial cause, this is mainly our own study and practice. Through our own efforts and study, our own efforts in a practice, that creates the first type of cause. Yeah. So let's talk now about the auxiliary causes. If we think from the point of view of the example of the story of the great Lama Tsongkhapa, for example, we can think that in terms of wisdom realizing emptiness, wanting to bring forth that wisdom realizing emptiness, the instructions that he received from the Buddha of wisdom Manjushri were that the substantial cause, right, of meditation on emptiness by itself is not enough. You must also strive to accumulate the auxiliary causes of this realization. And then at that time, Manjushri gave him the instructions to purify negativities, accumulate merits, and also make requests to the deity, understanding the deity as inseparable from the spiritual teacher. And when we look at the stories of the holy beings and all of those incredible stories, we can see that really this is kind of the sequence that is followed in terms of the spiritual practice. And so together with the seed of our practice, then when we gather together, we also want to, like putting water and fertilizer on the seed, accumulate those auxiliary causes through the certain practices. And there's a piece of advice that Geshe would like you to think about. And this is a very simple but profound advice that was uttered by the Buddha and continues to be uttered by the subsequent generations of spiritual teachers, which is that beneficial activities have the result of happiness. Harmful activities have the result of suffering. This is like kind of the linchpin that all practice comes together with. And on the coarser level, right? On the coarser level, we can definitely see how this plays out and develop confidence. So, for example, we know that the kinder that we are, the more sort of harmonious our relationships with the people around us will be. That's one example of how this plays out. And also the results of anger. So, for example, if we look at those beings in the animal realm, if there's a very kind of vicious, ill-tempered dog, all of the other dogs in that area will try to avoid them, right? So that lack of connection is the result of anger. So, because we said that beneficial thoughts have the result of happiness, that a harm has the result of suffering, then we need to think about what is beneficial that we want to bring forth. In terms of the beneficial minds that we can bring forth, there are none more powerful than bodhicitta, rooted in great love and great compassion. And so, if we are able to bring these forth, then we can definitely achieve the perfect result.
Ota tandi somba tiga somba zombo jabonda wa tiga roba cheke mena. Akosarawa ta tuni tu bishira pita ba tandi jiwa yina yishi dechi wala mato kodon rotogi togmudiwas.
So it's also important to note these here, because without kindness, love, compassion, and so forth, even if we were to perfect our wisdom, achieve that wisdom realizing emptiness, without the love and compassion in the background, that realization of wisdom would only benefit us. It would not be able to contribute to the welfare, to the benefit of others.
Ota tandi ji za ta thuma kanone zu denga zo no ji ota hakosarawa somba do shwa shonji sesi ta gya te ota zo tandi ji was.
And so that is why it is so important that when we engage in practice or listening to the teachings, that we establish this motivation that is rooted in both love and compassion.
Ota tandi ji za ta ota gabi ngri ta lele chin ro yi.
So and we will proceed then with a joyful mind.
Ota lise shwa lele chin ale to de shos.
So put the body and mind in a relaxed, peaceful state. And to start, as much as possible, bring your mind into a state of neutral equanimity. So try to bring, using this image, bring forth the state of mind that my mind is like the empty sky. It is vast, unobstructed, spacious. And think about on a very calm day when you look up at the sky and it is cloudless, clear, filled with a gentle light. Try to bring that sort of space within your mind. And think about the mind's nature, that no matter what disturbing or afflicted thoughts arise, no matter what troubling or upsetting thoughts arise, these are not the nature of the mind. They're adventitious. They just cover the mind. The true nature of the mind is like this vast sky filled with gentle light.
No kangon bo tsuma tandi ji yar tene ta konzo chile ta ludu tandi la tene ane lowe tani chi ala tene sha lo mesho kasa kane timba na sochi
So the mind is clear, vast, and luminous, but we know that depending on the wind and the moisture, sometimes it fills with clouds. Sometimes the sky is disturbed and stormy, just like sometimes our mind is disturbed by the afflictions.
No can no ji se yung ru ji zu ma de ya bo ji re de lo wei ji na zu la de ne da jin ba zu me na zu no ji ge da so wa chou me ba no do na zu ji yung ge.
So the sky is vast and luminous, our mind is vast and luminous, but from time to time, these adventitious defilements, afflictions arise, and they are like clouds that form, that cover the true nature of our mind.
Yung ka le chang sang le de do jie na zu la de ne jin ba ji ba ye wa xian ne le no ki rong ji ngong bo zu ma ya ba de yung ya re.
But we know that sometimes when there's not that much moisture, when there's not too much wind blowing, that those clouds evaporate and we can see the sky's true nature, its vast luminosity.
Tēlā yung ngā rō sūwa lī tu sē shiwa lēlē jīni tēwani. Ani tē chē wā yī na, tā nō kē rōng jīn, sū mā nō jī, sē tē yung tā, lō wē yī tani, jē nā sō tēr jī pā yī nē sū mā chō nō.
So in this meditation, when we settle our body and mind into a state of peaceful stillness, then those clouds, right, of the distracting thoughts, they dissolve. And then we can see the vast sky-like spaciousness. We can get a taste of the vast sky-like spaciousness of our mind.
Nō kīn jā yā wā nō jī, tā lō wē yī tani, tsō wā chō mē bā, nō tō chō mē bā rī jī, tā pā rā mā yī tā yā rō yō sō bā jī.
When we ease into this stillness, what we'll find is that very gradually, all of those adventitious, disturbing thoughts, like a fading rainbow, they melt into the sky of our mind.
Yā lā tēne lē yung, ani ngā tō mā chā wā dē wā, sē yu kē yung bō, shī wā, wā lē lē chī chua sōng sō bā jī.
And when we settle into that stillness, we'll find that even our physical body feels different and more open before. And certainly our mind is more peaceful, more relaxed than before.
Sē rōng jī gē sā wā, tēn jī gē tā sē yā bō tē, tā shī dē ngī nē jī gē tā, jā lā sō sī ngī nē kā sē tā tā tēn bō yā chū yī sō bā jī.
Based upon this pure luminous mind, then if I accumulate the causes for real, true happiness, I will definitely be able to achieve it.
Tēn rōng jī bō gē shī dē gā mā yī bā. Rōng jī kāng gē gē tā shī dē tā tū chī gē jā lā yā chū yī sō bā jī.
But think my mere happiness, my personal happiness is not enough. I must accumulate vast causes so that I can also contribute, also lead others to lasting happiness. And in order for this to be actualized, with single-mindedness, I will make praises and requests to the holy beings. Do you guys hear the bell when I ring it? The people at home? No, you don't, eh? Okay. I have to see if there's something we can do with the settings about that. So starting on the first page. Tenpa chonten de deshe sheba chachomba yondaba zobe sanje sheba dang shasu tenpa dewa sheba jite chenpa sheba ndoye karo chewa lana mepa ladong bino ki tenpa sanje chonten de pechawa shakya dewa la shase lo chede gyalse chi Tenpa chonten de deshe sheba dachomba yandaba zube sanje sheba dang shasu tenpa dewa sheba jite chenpa chebu dewe kalo jowa lana meba ladang minangi tenpa sanje chonten de pechawa shakya tuwa la shase lo chede kyasu I'm giving page numbers today because we have some visitors. So page 22. Idam Guru
Ratna Mendala Kaniriyadaya.
Refuge and bodhicitta.
Sonje
Chedan
Chedan Sojo
Soge
Chona
Chenam La Jangchu Bado Dani Kyasu Chi Dagi Chenye Gibe Sonam Ge Jola Peche Sange Joba Sho
Sonje
Chedan Soge Chenam La Jangchu Bado Dani Kyasu Chi Dagi Chenye Gibe Sonam Ge Jola Beje Sonje Jobar Sho
Sonje
Chedan Sogi Chenam La Jangchu Bado Dani Gyalse Chi Dagi Chenye Gibe Sonam Gi Jola Beje Sonje Jobar Sho.
Oya 다 되면 되네 간조 다 루치야 되다 배도 야보요 되네 다 야루로 소서와 저 버스 주발진 로야 다 도다니 그 샤와니 데 같이 말레스
And in order for our gathering today to become as beneficial as possible, then it is very important to bring forth the perfect attitude, because as we know, the activities at the beginning are very important.
어다 아니 저도다 니 같이 뭐라와스 도메 샤와텔라 로 노아레 제바든 제제 다 노가 이는 샹도 데 많이 많이 나다 로소서 버게 이치 제사도 근데 다 템보요 추그르와스
And so in terms of these activities at the beginning, there's two. So the first of these is refuge, that which allows us to distinguish a correct from a mistaken path. And Geshe said, certainly if you're not Buddhist, then you think about your own sort of object of faith or refuge.
어다 노와 그런 버게 든지 노와치 이나나 어다 샹도 데 할래야 그 버게 템보도 같이 못 저요아레스
And certainly if one is a Buddhist, then having a kind of stable and secure refuge is something that is extremely important.
샤 코로스 니네라 하고서라 샤 코로스 니네라 나로솔 페도 데야 생제 요졸 페도 데야 잘로 강가 조차와레스 저차와레스
So in terms of the objects that we go to for refuge, right, it's very important to understand that the objects of refuge, from their side, they have done all the work, accumulated all of the causes to be able to help us and also all beings without distinction.
어다 루루 소생이네 이치도 려와도 다 든지 템보요 바이는 코로스니네 샤도 마샤사 간조 도바그요 마레스
And so what that means, because they've accumulated those causes, is if we approach the objects of refuge with faith, if we really place our hope within those objects of refuge, they will definitely be able to benefit us.
어다 페나 간조 스타 셜로라 다 버게 토지라 셜로라 어느 kumame 바스타 사자질 되요나 하고서라 다 요나 차이 강에 차와 강에 요나 동의 강에 와라와스
So if we imagine that we are in a kind of wilderness environment without any house or shelter, we know that we are very vulnerable to the elements such as heat and cold.
어다 차이 강에 동의 강에 그 대이상아 대파샤야게 된다 매와줘야게 된다 kumbandawo chi page kuba me thongyo ares pani hol yo ares
Yeah.
이나요 kuba chi gogo de de ba ina
Mm-hmm.
하고 서로 대sonji 차이 강에 동의 강에 면도 말아와스
And so then imagine that you're in this place and then you come upon a house and you think, in order to protect myself from these elements, from this heat and this cold, then I must definitely inhabit this house. But just merely wishing for the house isn't going to bring you much benefit unless you actually enter it.
어다 간주 때제 바꾸게 짠도 요래 되는데 다니서 때리요 반니는 로요 말 kuban노노
So that's what our situation is. Kind of, we know what the house looks like and it's sitting there right in front of us. Yet despite the heat or the cold that we're experiencing, we don't actually walk through the door.
다 대인 다 kuban노 파친 저도 바이는 ku바데 차이 강에 동의 강에 강가를 샤도 그러와스
And we know that if we enter that house, right, it is able to protect us from the worst of the elements, from the worst of the heat and the cold.
어다 페나 자와 토지 치미노 지시 워숭근도 와스 어 나를 샨데 템보지 요 아이자 뭐도 뭐마 이건 지발을 당간지
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama has very clearly expressed that because he has this stable object of refuge, he doesn't need to fear harm by human and non-human or seen and unseen beings.
다 대노지치래 다 던지지 다 지체 대용 지체 12톤에 다 장로를 보게 대화도 레와도 가리나
Kampanangla droya kande sogre dice.
사대라스 되시면 간가
So that's very important in this context of refuge to really place kind of like our hopes and our confidence in those objects of refuge.
다 되게 되는 것이 자기 도와 대이다 지체 12톤에라
Yep. And what will allow us to really benefit from this refuge is understanding the reason, right, behind why these objects of refuge can afford us true protection, and in that way placing our hope and confidence in them. And also with faith and confidence, right, it is easy to make a mistake and place faith and confidence in the wrong object. However, we can't abandon them because faith and confidence, when placed in correct objects, can be something that brings very great benefit. So Geshe is saying that in terms of what faith or confidence in the wrong object or in the wrong person can sort of, the problems it can create, right? We have the instructive story of Angulimala in the Buddhist scriptures. And at first, because of putting his faith and trust in the wrong teacher, he engaged in killing and many negative actions, right? Can everyone hear me all right? Geshe is doubting. Okay, all right. But we have to be careful where we place our faith and confidence. We must evaluate, because when faith and confidence is placed in the wrong object or person, that can be a grave mistake. And in fact, continuously placing faith in the wrong objects can create the causes to, from lifetime to lifetime in the future, go from wrong view to wrong conduct and wrong view to wrong conduct. On the other side, if we have faith and confidence in a path that is complete, unmistaken, and correct, then that creates the cause from lifetime to lifetime in the future to go in the positive direction. So going for refuge in the three jewels, which allows us to distinguish correct from mistaken paths, and then beyond that, that which allows us to set aside a limited in favor of a vast path, the uncommon Mahayana refuge, understanding the reasonings to bring forth these minds at the beginning of the session. And also when we go for refuge, understanding that there are three jewels, there are three objects of refuge, and so we must go to these three in a complete way. We can't go for refuge to two and disregard one. Similarly, we can't add additional ones on top of that and go for refuge to four objects. And so also when most of us go for refuge as we are right now, what's going to help us to bring forth kind of steadiness or feeling in this practice of refuge is going for refuge from the point of view of the cause, the causal refuge. But as we progress along the path, actually, what we'll find is that as we become more mature, it will be the resultant refuge, which becomes our main practice of refuge. I said to Geshe, I think some people, when they hear resultant refuge, maybe just he's sorry. I just thought it might be nice if he explained to people, because I think I saw some new faces, so maybe people don't know what resultant refuge is. That's right. He said there's question and answer at the end. Sorry. My apologies. Yeah. 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 So when we think about the first jewel, right, which is the Buddha jewel, and we think about this from the causal refuge practice, we think of those beings who achieved enlightenment, such as Buddha Shakyamuni, such as Maitreya, and so forth, understanding that they achieved enlightenment and going for refuge to them for that reason. But from the causal perspective, actually, what we can understand is that there is a Buddhahood, there is an enlightenment that we ourselves will achieve. And that is also an object of refuge. So going for refuge to the Buddhahood, which is our own object of attainment, that is also a valid method of going for refuge to the Buddha jewel. Again? So we might not have achieved the actualization of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha jewel within ourselves today, but we should understand that that is something that is possible and that we will achieve at some point in the future. And so if you want to kind of investigate this more, there's a lot of discussion of refuge from the point of view of causal refuge and resultant refuge in many scriptures, such as the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Sublime Continuum, and so forth. So in order to kind of prepare ourselves for the next meditation, we're going to still our mind from unwholesome thoughts. We are going to rest the mind in a state of equanimity. Like setting down a glass of water, the particles of within the water will settle to the bottom. In the same way, we settle our mind from those discursive thoughts. And in this way, the channels and the prana, the winds flowing through the channels, are imbalanced. The four elements within our body are imbalanced. So, with a relaxed attention, place your awareness on the rising and falling of the breath.
mi pachin ko lele yaba yin ta chome be chowa no to ro jinya chu ju no ji nya chu chu ta ja so chimo gi to me was de no ji ren du.
And by maintaining our single pointed awareness on the rising and falling of the breath, the mind is like the surface of a calm ocean. Even if there are fish and sea creatures moving beneath the surface remains placid.
Yang se ya po de yun jung la ta wa yin ta ye kan ri ji la ta wa yin na ko ta to pa ta ne re to pa tong to pa ga ne sa chin du so much.
And as we move deeper into this practice and build this awareness, what we'll find we develop is a confidence that our mind can not only observe, but it can stay focused on any object and it can understand the subtleties of that object.
ane zu se ya po de ta ro jin zu ta ji ma ri ba so shi pi ta se ngen ba kang ga la ta le ka me ba shi so to ba so gi so much.
So think by taking this power, this concentration of the mind, I will place it on correct objects, which will allow me to clear away the things in the mind that are causing all of these difficulties, the self-cherishing attitude and the ignorance grasping at the self.
Go ma dan do dan na sa sin ji se le ta wa yin na ta yi de gong wa ji ma yi de mo gong wa ji ju me so much.
Then we think beyond, we expand our awareness beyond ourselves and think every being we encounter, human, animal, and so forth, none is a stranger. Everyone is connected to us.
So ni ta tu chu ju yi sa ta de da le pen ba ta tu ji de ge lu so much.
Because every one of them is close to us and have possibly benefited us, I must bring them not just ordinary benefit, but lead them to ultimate benefit and happiness.
Ndi so ma no yin wa la ta so so le ni pa me a yi sa nga se de a de ta song ji cha to ba shi so ge du so much.
Because in my present state, I don't have the capacity, the power to really benefit beings in that way. What I must do is take this I, take this self, and actualize complete enlightenment, full Buddhahood. Then I'll be able to benefit others.
말로서 샤와고 셰파드다 지기 샤와다 어다 디체도 하시고 무슨
May all of my efforts and activities striving in the Dharma become causes to actualize this Buddhahood for the benefit of others.
말리어 버텔다 던지게 센사치고 로조도 놀래시 쇼바스다 가와서 말리 거치서
Using this powerful human body and mind, I have exerted myself in the study and practice of the teachings. In this way, I have been able to take the essence, to take what is meaningful from this human life. So when we have time, and definitely we all do have a few spare moments in the day, at home, if we can just go through these steps to try to habituate ourselves to the motivation, to the aspiration of bodhicitta, this is very beneficial. So, and also when we have a longer time than at home, really dedicating ourselves to applying the instructions of bodhicitta, for example, the 7-point cause and effect, or the 5 points related to equalizing and exchanging self and others. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has stated that even if we are able to meditate on bodhicitta just for a very brief moment, this is an unbelievably powerful purification for the negativities accumulated since beginningless rebirths within samsara. So how we're able to actualize this benefit, of course, depends upon our time and the effort that we put into the practice. But in terms of the capacity of this mind of bodhicitta to completely purify negativities and obscurations, of this we need have no doubt. And in order for it to be able to bring this about effectively, we need to know the stages of how to purify our mind. And in order to be able to have instructions on that, we will turn to the text. Yeah, so actually we're at the point in the text. So we're on page 12, outline 5, the measure of mind training. So Geshe said, actually, we're at the point of the text where we'll eventually come to a discussion also of the commitments of mind training. And this is really clear advice on what minds to take up and abandon. And actually these commitments of mind training and how to practice them, this is something that should be done daily, just like we eat every day. It's not something that you just show a fleeting interest in and then kind of put aside later. And it's really nice because the instructions are very clear what we're supposed to do and think when we are experiencing, prosperous times, and also what we are supposed to do and think when we are experiencing difficulties. So then we come to the 5th outline, which is on page 12, which is the measure of mind training. So then the root text says, All teachings share a single purpose. The purpose of all the teachings of the greater and lesser vehicle is to tame self-grasping. This means that Dharma practice is meaningless unless it functions as an antidote to self-grasping. Oh, that's it.
오다 단다간다 바마타 간조 로조도 단용레 게제시에 대한데 타바칭 미르기더니 로조도 용레 게제 가존에 라바 노지레.
So then all of our kind of mind training practice is really the study and the practice of the Mahayana teachings.
오다 던디지 자 로조세 가존 미 도야 된 간조 게제시에 자송아 조조데 자 쇼주 세기 용레 시에 먹어가지 대노네 다진 요지가 다조
So when we say mind training, Geshe also mentioned previously like how we can understand this. We can understand that mind training is ultimately the practice of bodhicitta. And then we can also say that mind training is specifically the practice of equalizing and exchanging self and others.
다 띄워 다 던디지 자 조내사 되라 다 롱진들 내와진 로고 먼저나
So when we talk about the measure, I know some folks might not have it's asking Geshe, can I share something? So I know some folks might not have English as their first language. So when we talk about the measure of something, it's like, how do I know I reached that? So Geshe is saying that we know that we have reached the measure of mind training when our self-cherishing is starting to dissipate, when our self-cherishing is starting to reduce.
This one, that 가정 이지 전주지 셀 니여바 노지.
And also remember too that this text talks about two types of bodhicitta. So mainly we have this focus on relative bodhicitta, but there's also ultimate bodhicitta. And so sometimes the text talks about the measure of mind training is the reduction of self-grasping. So we know that we've trained our minds a little bit when self-grasping is reduced. And that self-grasping can be expressed from two perspectives: the self-grasping that is the self-cherishing, selfish attitude, and the self-grasping that is also the ignorance grasping at a truly existent self.
This one, that is 다요, 나요, 희요.
So generally we can say that on the relative level, there is a self, there is a person, there is an I, there is a being.
다 노데사치 구자기 다음에 구자기 다음에 라게야.
Yeah. So why then do we talk about the selflessness of persons? What does that mean?
다 구자기 다음에. 구자기 다음에. 다 구자기 다음에 구자 루지지트바메 된다 때를 탄저하시나.
So when we say selflessness of persons, what does that mean from the Prasangika perspective? That means that there is a lacking of an inherently existent, a truly existent self of persons. That's what it means. Yeah. So then when we talk about self-grasping, when we talk about grasping at true existence, that's really talking about this inherent existence from the Prasangika perspective. And so this grasping at inherent existence is kind of like the most subtle level of ignorance. Yeah, the most subtle level of ignorance. But the interesting thing is that in other schools of philosophy, for example, the Majjhimika Sautantrika, they distinguish between they talk about the difference between grasping at true existence and grasping at self-existence. It's explained differently. And so grasping at the self is actually said to be a coarser expression of grasping at true existence in this school.
저거도와 어다 못한 저거도 리소스 어때 하고 살아와 어다 뒤에 뭐지 만도나 간다 저로죠 근데 어다 따다로요 말해서 그도와스
So if the antidote, if the self-grasping is not reducing from practicing those teachings, then we have not met that measure of the mind training.
theo chi xie ce dan zi jian nian bo ro yin du na lo ju ji la xi da yi lo ju yi ce
So if the Dharma does not function as an antidote to self-grasping, that is a sign that mind. If the Dharma does function as an antidote to self-grasping, that is a sign that mind training has developed in one's being.
어다 되지 간가 같이 모르다스 링어게 다 그냥 비와 간디스 들어봐 이나 이노래 간디스 저와 이나 만즈가 녀볼 손을 돈 로요나 다다 노래기네 돼.
So whatever Dharma practice we engage in, whatever meditation we cultivate, if we do it with the intention for it to act as an antidote to self-grasping, it will become a pure, true practice of Dharma.
어다 치치스 소마소 그 제바 너나 예비 너 Yeah.
So then this is the real indication. I see Geshe is straining to see those letters. I got him a pair of glasses last week. He says he can see them well. I'm not so sure. I bought him a pair of glasses a couple of weeks ago. I examine everything. This is the real indication of progress in the Dharma. So it is likened to the bar on the balancing scales that weigh practitioners.
Okay,
Geshe insists he can see it fine, so I accept. So when we speak of Dharma, right? When we say Dharma in the perspective of the teachings here, the Dharma means the teaching of liberation. It's the teaching of liberation. And so liberation means what, right? It means liberation from the afflictions. So Dharma, therefore, must be something that reduces the afflictions. Ale, kare? So when Atisha first arrived in Tibet, he saw people engaging in many different kinds of practices for example, circumambulating stupas. And when he said this, he said, circumambulating stupas is nice, but how wonderful it would be if you actually practice Dharma. And so then one of his students thought, okay, circumambulation isn't the practice of the Dharma, so then I should just recite texts. So then he started reciting texts. And then Atisha said, it's really nice that you are reciting those texts, but it would be even nicer if you were practicing Dharma. And then eventually the student became frustrated. He said, no matter what kind of virtuous activity I do, you say it would be nicer if I practice Dharma. So like, what am I supposed to do? And so then Atisha explained that the practice of Dharma is taming the mind, and taming the mind means the mind not being led by the afflictions, being subdued from the afflictions. So in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it explains that no matter what type of outer enemy we have, that outer enemy can only cause us problems in this lifetime. There is no outer enemy that can continually lead us to the lower realms.
다 대이스다 당인네 넣는 가서 노대요레스 당인네 못래 도와스 다 첸더 좀더 맞아 샤와니 샤와를 버경에 소를 쳐도그 다레스
So we've identified the enemy incorrectly, right? We think that our enemies are things that are outside of us, but actually we need to look within, and then we will see that our true enemy is the afflictions, because it is the afflictions, the unwholesome minds, that is what can lead us to the lower realms in lifetime to lifetime in the future.
다 대스트인 이민지 소노 자침보 돈을 거 부타다 메와서게 하지 내서 예다다 메일 레바 메일인데 다 자치조레스
Yes, and so this on the basis of this, can this nyumo me pasoy dang gyachampo so?
되는 소노 자침보 돈을 메와서 가라와스 알레 칸도 가와
Ale,
얘는 메일 레바도 메일이데 레라쇼레
And so
야쇼레스
the best way to get rid of those afflictions is to expand our way of thinking. And to develop this vast, expansive way of thinking, we have the very best conditions to do that with this human mind and this human body.
다 던도이는 달롱보체 되지 다 스포 체쇼들에 되는 이나요 다 던디게 니바데죠 요 말레스
So if it's something that is a power that's within, we can look at many powerful beings in the animal world. For example, if you think of a great elephant, but as big and powerful as its body is, it cannot lead us to the lower realms.
다 치시냐고 칠로도 만도 체데 하고 송왔어 대 치수란 자이 다 송어세리 야마
Yeah.
나도 야마 저거와
Jamasana?
킬로
Kilo. Yeah.
킬로 줘야 돼도 지바레스
Yeah. So the indication of the progress of the Dharma is that reduction in the self-grasping. And here that's given as like the scale, the scale that weighs the heavy and the light things to determine the practitioner.
다 대련도 마도 먹어야 볼라게도 마도 다 대지래
Yeah. And so it's not whether people praise us or whether they say that we're a good practitioner or not. That's not the measure of being a good practitioner.
대다 자와노는 된도 뿜보니지 조 운보이는 뿜보니지 조즈 시바레사 자와노
Of the two witnesses, so we're on the top of page 13 for those of you with the text, of the two witnesses, rely upon the principal one.
시바나 yen다 나레 조데 근지지라 치신도 치와서 뭐샤와 텔라세와 이시 옌지 아니 마체와요 뿜보 이메지 대조 무즈데사
Yeah, so we'll continue with the text. Others might say, this brother is an example of the saying that one in whom the Dharma has arisen is a fine practitioner. Not meeting others' disapproval is indeed a form of testimony, but do not take it to be the most important.
다 예라요 지시 코로에 다 인도 가와데와 다 대요 있어도 야보도록 왔어 아고서라 이나요 대조 조 치소도 맞음
So of course it's encouraging when others say that one is a true practitioner of the Dharma, but don't take that as the most important measure of your progress, because it is not.
칠로요도 매 빈보지 그거야래 빈보세를 하고 근데
Pumbo, hamuko.
빈보세를 다고 따다 세 다기지 킹인에서 그야래 킹인에서 그야 말에 빈보
Yeah. Ale.
빼는 가서 내가 야보도 뒤자지서도 마서야 돼 메젠다 질 키즈도 마서 지스도 마서 스케쳐서 지와라
Yeah.
될 빈보세
Pumbo, ale, pumbo. Yeah, so yene di kandes drogere aboko maso.
세시오스 그마티가 야 디디 샤와도 저 디지바레 잘라바이나 디짤요 김마칠 개저처가라
Yeah.
메젠다 질
Yeah.
코 빈보 차거 빈보
Ale. Yeah, dene pumbo sure. Pedinala.
sen 메젠다 드레스 kilaka 디지스도 마소
Yeah.
지 마소 잘라바이나 키야고 그러와
Yeah.
메젠다 드
Yeah.
어때 빈보레스
Ale, loso. Yeah, so Geshe said the testimony is not just a testimony. It's considered a testimony when it comes from somebody with knowledge, somebody important. So Geshe is just explaining that here, the example that's being given, the person who's giving testimony, it would be like if you're on a big work site for a construction job or something. You wouldn't ask the other workers whether the job was completed correctly or not. You would go to the foreperson. So you would go to the foreperson and then you would say to them, has it been correct? So the testimony means somebody who knows a little bit what they're talking about.
하고서라 다 실로를 빈보세를 로가지 좋은데 왔어
Yeah.
다 로로 소소 치려 번도도 만도 빈보대 다 쉐이 논제도 던질라 다요 말에 소소가 하고요.
And so the testimony of Dharma practice actually cannot be given truly by an external witness who, for example, praises our practice of the Dharma or does not. Because in fact, the only one who can give authentic testimony about progress in the Dharma is ourselves, because only we know the state of the afflictions and what is wholesome within our mind.
어때이자 조이고 수근도 와스 저로서 단이 대지도 일라야 저로서 라야 여보레테는 니세 저로서 두고 말아 와스 하고 말아 와스.
So people can say, like I can give kind of praises to you about, you did well in exerting yourself in Dharma practice, but I can't really give a true important testimony, because ultimately it is only you who knows what is going on within your mind.
Yeah, 시시로 나래서 통이 좀 것이비소.
Yes.
Yes.
So Geshe said the next line is one that he finds really helpful and really heavy, actually. Ordinary people in the world cannot read minds, so they might be satisfied with glimpsing a fraction of outer conduct.
어다 단다이나요다 어다 디야 지시에게도 가와이나 단고고 첨부도 기타네 자나도 대지 가사칼 뭐뭐요 대지요 머리를 거니요 나오지요아레스.
And this is a warning. Geshe actually sees this as a warning. There might be Dharma teachers who look very impressive, who say flattering things and things that you want to hear. So they have an outer conduct that is very pleasing, but inside, the motivation is not good. Many people, not only in kind of Eastern countries within the Chinese diaspora, but also within our Western countries here, are misled by false teachers because of that.
어다 뚜마니 노지 드리도 그렇게 쳐보마 차와 말했더니 이나요 가솔라바 노지 노스도 내스니데 가세 거다리서
So normally we talk about distinguishing between the way that an object appears and its mode of abiding. In other words, the way that it actually is. So normally we talk using those terms when we're thinking about emptiness. But Geshe said also, this applies to selecting a Dharma teacher. Really try to see, okay, this is the outer appearance of that teacher, but what is their true mode of abiding, right? Is there authenticity there or not?
다시 안 그러면 뭐처럼 아마 다 대화도 전화를 듣는 거는 어느 다 듣는 치기 잡고 있었기 뭐벌래요 그랬어. 어느 건조 지을었더니 건조 노는다 만들래 같이네. 할래 강에 뭐죠. 라망이네 이도 많이 서로 지소해요.
Yeah, so His Holiness the Dalai Lama, some people some maybe from, Geshe isn't sure if from Taiwan or from China, but some very faithful practitioners from that part of the world, they came and said, like many people are saying that they're a Dharma king and so forth. So is that true? And then But we have to be careful, because somebody just saying they're a Dharma king or having an impressive title does not mean that they're an authentic teacher. And with these people, people came with these impressive titles and credentials and actually led them in the wrong direction. So we need to be careful. Yeah. And His Holiness said also, I can't certify or decertify every single Dharma teacher that is out there. It's actually your responsibility to check what the qualities of a teacher are in a text and then to determine whether to follow someone or not. So what are the qualities of the teacher? What are the qualities of the student? These are important things to be clear on as we continue in our practice. Yeah. So Geshe states you might even meet impatient lamas who are kind of like rushing you, like, you haven't taken me as a teacher yet, what's wrong? But you are allowed to take your time, is what Geshe saying.
So
there's in some of the scriptures it actually says that you can investigate for like 9 or 10 years to determine if a teacher is a reliable spiritual guide. And so there was a story of a student who approached the teacher and said, I've watched you for 9 years, so now I feel secure that I can take you as my guru. And so then the Lama said to him, not so fast. You took 9 years to decide if I was good enough to be your teacher. So now I'm taking 9 years to decide whether or not I want to accept you as a student. Yeah. Yeah. So then Geshe said, that's 18 years to go through that process. Yeah. And so then the student started to doubt, maybe I took a bit too long with 9 years. Yeah. Losugi. So we talk about the mode of appearance of the object and its actual mode of abiding. There's also other ways that we can apply kind of this way of thinking, like, for example, with the teacher. Yeah. So the principal witness, therefore, is an unembarrassed look at one's own mind. To examine oneself thoroughly with an honest mind and have no cause to feel ashamed is a sign of having trained the mind. Yeah. So whether one is a true Dharma practitioner or not, this is a place where we are our own witness. So if we look at our conduct and there is nothing that gives rise to shame or regret, then we know, right, that we have been practicing authentically. If we have an impressive appearance of being a Dharma practitioner, but when we look, there's things within our mind that are shameful or dissatisfying to us, then we know we haven't really met that measure of being an authentic practitioner. So actually, in the other text we're looking at, in the 400 verses by Aryadeva, it talks about being honest and unbiased as qualities that are important for the students when looking at a teacher, for example, but also for a student. So we need to look in our mind and see if we are honest and unbiased. So yes, so generate the antidotes and make an effort not to discredit yourself. The root text says, maintain a joyful attitude. This one, so always maintain only a joyful attitude. Through the force of training the mind well, we can be confident that we will be able to integrate any adversity we might face in the path of mind training. This is a measure of having trained the mind. So Geshe said this is another way to say, have I been successful in mind training or not? Have I met this measure? It's when we're meeting unfortunate circumstances, when we are encountering difficult obstacles. If we can not only transform those into occasions for Dharma practice, but also do that with a joyful mind, this is a sign that we are close to that measure of having trained the mind. And so then, because we want to train the mind and proceed along the path, and because ultimately to proceed along the path, we need to bring forth wisdom, specifically the wisdom realizing emptiness, we will now turn to our other text, which is Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. And so we are on page 35, and I believe we're on either verse 290 or 291. This one? Chutrukpasana Chudi Kangi
Oh, the-
Chekyurpa. Yeah, so 291, Geshe said, 291.
Chinda kongi shichapa, ten yela magate, esa tina dala chi tenen jibi godon dawa no.
For those who think, whoever knows this teaching will not relish others. Thus, to me, this teaching seems like the door to destruction.
Oh, ta ni chi ya shulo ka da le ga chenbo dong ngaro su ta ga chuya ga wen de chi bi ba re
So-
ka chenbo chi cha
This is a heavy verse, but also if we think about it in the right way, this is something that will bring kind of forth a joy to our mind, actually.
Oh, jise ka re za la ba yin chin de lan de za ta wa yin na.
Ah.
Ta ayan de wa khoro ga ta tu ma ni ta pe har se ka.
Ah.
Si wo si ju bo ge tong cai ta chi re ya re.
Because when we look at this verse, it becomes very clear to us that the Pandit who wrote this, Aryadeva, had seen emptiness clearly.
Oh, de chin de kongi shichapa, ten yela magate esa chi de tu ma ni ga chi. Ta wa ta tu.
So whoever knows this teaching will not relish others. That means whoever has kind of comprehended emptiness will not seek other explanations for reality.
Oh, ta de tu ma ni ga ta wa de si shi ba yin na.
Mhm.
Ta ji de ga sha wa ko yi sha wa ta ni mo be sha wa se ka re.
Mhm.
Oh, ta ten ji ga ne se cho me ba de je la ta.
Ah.
Ta ga wa de ngo ma re. Ga ga ma re se na.
Ale, di tompani hakona dene?
Se no ko yi ne se te la.
Yeah.
De
Ale.
ga wa ta no
Yeah.
cha ba chen mo de ngo ma re.
So whoever also delights or has develops a taste for this teaching on emptiness, Geshe is explaining that they will also not be distracted with samsara.
ha ko se re. Oh, ta ni nga zu ni mo ba che tra ne la de cha che tra, kun ro che tra ne di nyo da mo so se. Ta ni ta nyo da de ngo ma re se na.
And so also because we haven't yet tasted this emptiness, we remain kind of affixed within samsara, attachment, anger, and so forth arise. One who has an experience of this, these will not be arising so strongly.
Di na je te ten di za. Tong song.
Yep. Yep.
Da la chi ten ji be go don da wa no.
So thus, Geshe said, thus means for this reason. So thus, to me, this teaching seems like the door to destruction.
Di na da la da se ko ro. Ayan da wa ko ro pa pa la
Yeah.
ko ro.
So to me, we see here from this verse, Aryadeva is speaking to himself.
ha ko sara cho me be ta sha wa ne se kang ga lo ji be go da wa de. Cha so da wa ji.
So actually, like the door to destruction means the door to destruction of what is meaningless, of what is mistaken or distracting.
ha ko so.
Mhm.
O ta nga zo yin na ta chi ba ra wa sa ta kha la yin re sa ja yin re ta ka re yin na ya shu chi ra cha so na.
Mhm.
ha ko sara ta yin da ten cho me ba te je ta ma ga ti ga ma ra wa.
So to use a worldly example, right? Let's say that you get some sort of windfall, and then you're able to enjoy like the best food, the nicest places to stay, and so forth. Then in comparison to that, the things that you had experienced before, right? They wouldn't seem that impressive. So this is the same case, right, with this emptiness.
O ta se ga cho wa che shu cho wa ya shu de ki ra cha ita ta ni ta cho me be ne se te de ga wa de ngo ya ma re.
From experiencing emptiness, we bring forth kind of the very best feeling, the very best clarity within the mind. And then worldly things, because of that, they lose their meaning, actually.
O ta ti chu lo ka chi te ga ta wa ngem ba kang ga lo me ba zo yu jo de ga re ta.
And the door to destruction means that this teaching can destroy all meaningless activities and understandings.
De so wa ta de ni te da me nyon de te tar ko la go ni ba te ne ye be ka la ga me bin ji ba ka lan jo sa.
292. For those who think there is in reality no self and abide in this thought, how will existence cause pleasure or non-existence cause fear?
O ta da me be ta yi ga ta cho wa te ta so so se le tempo tu ta pu ge cho wa chen bo chi le ba inas.
So this is saying that when we speak about the selflessness of persons, if we develop conviction of this selflessness, what kind of feeling or experience will arise?
De so wa o ta te ne ye be ka la ga se de ta ji te chi je la su be ne se sha sha wa ko yi ne se ya po mo mo chi le ba ina ha le be ga to be ne se.
Yeah.
Once
Once we've tasted that selflessness, then no matter what sort of pleasant or enticing appearances arise within samsara, right, we will not have excessive pleasure or attachment towards that.
다 maybe 따따 이메 로마시 maybe 지바 갈란저 다용 지테 치제라서 다 매지 뭐 차야라만다 나소지 야보 차네라 대지 매바 차네 오다 강해지야 근데 오지 저 강해지 못 되는 거 말이야.
So Geshe said the non-existence in this particular context, he thinks the non-existence is saying the non-existence or the non-arising of things related to the worldly dharma. So things not arising like fame, gain, and so forth. When those things are not happening for us, we will not experience an undue fear.
나도 치지로 야보지로 와서는 대할레비 땜보지스 말이 비드.
Yeah.
바바바지 쇼테네트네 다 못 땜보지 사이즈 빠져 강해지 못해.
So for example, fame or praise, right? When we sort of over reify that, we kind of put so much of our self-esteem and importance in that. So then when that praise doesn't happen, or when others' opinions of us change, this becomes a cause for like a lot of fear and upset, actually.
다 된다 아미로 따따 텔콘도 토요에서 강해도 테론 강해도 테요 말이스.
But if we're able to kind of through our understanding of emptiness, not be kind of over the top about positive, completely despondent about negatives, we can really kind of traverse a middle path, which will stabilize our mind.
다 그때 워서는 되고 다 거야 요아래 숨이 요아래 다용 돈이라 못 잡히긴 했을런 도나용 도야 되려 사res.
So there is that's one way to understand the non-existence, the arising of those things. yenda디 돈이 카레?
돈이라 못 잡아 같은 것만 가서 못 잡아 지바 용기.
The other is the non-existence cause fear. Geshe said it could also be another way to understand this line is we talked about when people come close to kind of a good meditation on that emptiness, things seem to fall away, and then there can be that fearfulness that there's nothing there at all. So perhaps it is also pointing to that. That would be another way to understand. But as he stated before, actually, once we have kind of a good understanding of emptiness and dependent arising, then touching that experience of emptiness, this will not give rise to fear. Loso. Yeah.
근데 그러니까 제시 비깔 근데 녀와질 너야 말해 고자가 야 말해서 콜론선 다시 자수생도 왔어.
So
Yeah.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he had a friend who Geshe said that he thinks he was coming from like initially from another Indian spiritual tradition, and he had become a Buddhist, and he was friends with His Holiness. And so then His Holiness was explaining how there is no self of persons at all. And it was said that upon hearing this, he became very disturbed and he started to shake, like almost like a seizure.
근데 좀 전에 야가지를 그 니바 침벌렸을 때 이나 나 누워서 메텔라 마서. 나 누워 던데 이나 누워서 메텔라.
And so His Holiness said that this reaction was okay because although he had this kind of visceral kind of shaking fear that arose, he didn't insist that what His Holiness was saying was incorrect about the self of persons.
다 드니게 갈래라 근데 어다 메세테 마르다스. 고자테도 요아랭 아주 레사케.
So His Holiness, of course, explained there is no inherently existent self, but that doesn't mean that there is no self there at all. There is still a self that engages in everyday activities, that accumulates and experiences karma, cause and effect, and so forth, right? So then he went on to explain. Selflessness of persons means that if we try to find a pinpointable, stable self, we will not be able to. This is what we're pointing to with the selflessness of persons. So, for example, if you look at what Geshe is holding in his hand, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's a mala, a rosary. This mala or rosary can also be used to illustrate emptiness.
So normally,
as Geshe goes about his day, he usually has a mala in his hand. So he always has kind of this feeling of like, I'm holding on to this mala. And other people, they might see, oh, there's this monk with these prayer beads, with this mala. But if you were to actually look at that mala and look at each of the beads individually and then focus on the individual parts, that appearance of that stably existing mala, or rosary, that would start to dissolve.
다 대지 중간 레신이 보는 지는 뭐지 다 어배서 무슨 줄 알아요.
So this example is given by Lama Tsongkhapa in praise of eloquent explanations.
어느 어배지 때라 나차 신나 신나 잘라봐 이는 보여 샤샤진 아주 로이드 요아레스.
Another example would be to think about a forest, right? If we point towards a forest, if we see a forest in the distance, that seems something that's really solid and identifiable, doesn't it? But if that forest were really there from its own side, we could, the closer that we came to that forest, and even if we started to go within it and walk around, the more solid, right, that appearance of the forest would become. But even if for 100 years you walked around that forest, you wouldn't be able to identify that first kind of solid forest. You would just see those individual trees, right? And so that shows us actually that it is not naturally or inherently existent. So if we also see a group of soldiers in the distance, we will point and say that there is an army there. But then if you were to actually walk into that, what's it called, like a regiment or a battalion of soldiers? I don't know. If you were to walk into that battalion, then no matter how much you walked around, you would start to only see individual soldiers, right? That appearance of that very solid army would dissolve. So you'll find in many scriptures this kind of method as an example to help us understand emptiness. And this is very helpful to us because there are many different examples and metaphors and strategies for thinking about emptiness in the scriptures, and we can experiment with different ones and see what works for us. So we say that ignorance is like a tree, right, with deep roots and many, many different branches. And if it has many roots and branches, then our antidote to ignorance, the way that we cultivate our wisdom, it can't be unitary, right? We also need many different branches and ways of thinking about it. Again, So when we think about these various branches, actually what happens is we're also accumulating various causes of understanding. And eventually those causes of understanding, these will be ripened into knowledge or wisdom. So it's this gradual process of kind of nourishing this seed with all of the other factors and gradually being able to reap a harvest, for example, of apples. That is what it is like cultivating this wisdom. It's Pombaniti. So remember the story also of the Buddha witnessing that suffering, and that kind of gave rise spontaneously to that great compassion. This is an example of how if we accumulate all of these causes, a time will actually come when they ripen. Or we think about the story of a Sangha, right, who practiced for 12 years in retreat and thought that he had achieved nothing. But then from seeing a dog with terrible sores and suffering, then immediately just from witnessing that suffering, this very powerful, all those imprints ripened within his mind. So all of the things that we do, they place these potentials within our minds, and then eventually a time will come where a condition acts to ripen all of them. And that's why we also see, and it might even be hard for us to believe, but we look at the stories of the great kind of Buddhist masters, Modgalyana, Shariputra, and so forth. They heard just one verse of Dharma and were able to achieve realization, right? That's because of all the potentials previously placed within their minds.
Okay,
Jason.
Tema sabe jebai mate jemo tonen chinde bai sheola sishi ni ze shemunjo.
Verse 293, seeing the many forders who are seeds of futility, who would not feel pity for people who long for a teaching?
Otangaro shombadu niji tani ta tumani the gakigata masud sateva inayatani tsewa hakasara tsewa yabo tone yatiala.
So this is really saying that for those of us who have developed enthusiasm and some understanding of love, compassion, and the wisdom realizing emptiness, that will also naturally give rise to an enthusiasm that wants to also lead others to a path where they can develop these. So
Tema sabe jebai tema imba.
야부코기면도 연결되시죠.
시시워스 tema imba hakasarawa. 다 니에도 개차 아직 딜다가 말해. 맞아 바자 처음에발 바자 뭐야 이자. 시시에케 있는 얘기 있는 롤루발 뭐버치노야.
And so also we understand that the seeds of futility, these are like the seeds of kind of that are not leading to this beneficial path. So these can lead us actually to paths that take us away from the Dharma.
hakasara wata tandileta in ta loginel gaki reshunayo. Nanzo gawoshina tsawazone tseta ya yarti.
And so for those who do have the imprints, the liking of these teachings, then with a joyful mind, right? So we have pity for those with the imprints that lead them to the others, but then with a joyful mind, we lead them forwards. So the forders, Geshe said that his understanding of the forders, right? This often speaks of cultivators of various Indian spiritual traditions. But Geshe said that he's seen a commentary where it says it's not all of the forders or all of those traditions. It's specifically traditions that are connected with wrong conduct and so forth. So it's not as exclusive as it might seem at first glance.
So in this
way, we've covered 3 of these shlokas. So then with a happy mind, we will dedicate the merits. If you need to get on with your day after the dedication, please feel free. If you'd like to stay for questions, you are most welcome. So page 28.
Changcho semcho rinpoche mache panam chechur che chewa nyamba meba yang gone gonda bewa Tongni tawa rinpoche mache panam chechur che chewa nyamba meba yang gone gonda bewa Jumpe pao jidar kemba no gundu sambo de yon de jende de da kungi jesu dalo gewa de da tongshe radu ngo dusun shebe gewa tongshe je ngo wa gala chodu nga ba de dagi ge zawa de gun sambo jeje radu ngo wa
we can get that give us sort of so bunch of condition 90 ipala teneta or juga sinji uzuji ta shomba ni jiga pagcha ta
Through the merits, through the positive potential that I and others have accumulated, may this become a cause for the fundamental minds of love and compassion to arise in the continuums of all 6 types of beings within samsara.
So, Mamma Kanji, and I tap up commercial and which passion
Through these merits, may all of the unwholesome negative minds being held by these sentient beings be completely cleared away, and may only minds of kindness arise. Through these merits, I dedicate that until samsara is empty of sentient beings, I will continuously work for their benefit. I've been very fortunate and can experience a mind of joy from having placed these beneficial imprints within my mind. So we'll pause there. So now you can, I asked my question already, apparently. So now you are all, please feel free to ask your questions. I think I see a hand there, but I can't see whose name it's attached to. So go ahead, whoever has their hand up. I do see, am I like seeing things, or is there a hand that's up there? I do feel like there's a hand that I'm seeing.
I think that Julia, you've got your hand up.
Maybe she stepped away. Is there anyone else? Yeah, Koyamar. Maybe she pressed it by accident. Yeah. Is there anything on the Facebook or anything?
Hi there, this is Yolisa. Maybe I can ask a question today.
Okay, go for it.
I have two questions. One is if you could explain more about like resultant and causal refuge. I find that it's very important. I know he did go into it a little bit more, but I wonder if he could go into it a little bit more. And the other question I have is the difference between attachment and self-grasping. Like what's the difference between those two things?
All right, gotcha. Yeah. Then also the gyula tene kyamsudro dang dribula tene kyamsudro then so di kola di yewachetang younger tes sheroches.
Da pena majanda gas kenchusa donela.
Yeah.
Kenchusa kaniji
Yeah. Yeah. So the causal refuge is when we go for refuge to those outer beings who have already achieved those things as our source of refuge. Yeah. Our own future actualization of becoming, of achieving the Buddha jewel, of actualizing the Dharma jewel, of becoming a Sangha jewel, when we go for refuge and think with inspiration about our own future attainment of that is the resultant refuge. And also, it's important to remember that in either the causal or the resultant refuge, that the main refuge, the actual refuge, is the Dharma jewel. It's not the Buddha or the Sangha jewel. Yeah, and also the Gendun Kunjuk. Yeah, and so the kind of provisional sort of a Buddha jewel and Sangha jewel is also kind of ourselves. And so within us, what is the kind of provisional Dharma jewel, even though we haven't actualized it? Any sort of effort and practice that we have within the three trainings, higher training in ethics, higher training in concentration, and higher training in wisdom, this acts as the provisional Dharma jewel from the resultant perspective for us. Yeah, yeah, Sangye. Sorry. So when we apply ourselves in training in wisdom, and we have that moment where we actually realize emptiness, that direct realization of emptiness, then we have achieved the actual Dharma jewel within our mind. And at that point, when we have that direct realization of emptiness, the karma and the affliction that can compel us to take rebirth within samsara, this is said to be cleared away. Yeah, and at that point that we achieve that, what do we become? We become ourselves an actual Sangha jewel, an Arya Sangha jewel. Yeah, not yet the Buddha, but we become an Arya Sangha jewel. Yeah. And at that point, within these 5 paths, right, we're on the path, the actual path of seeing. And His Holiness has and His Holiness has stated that, you know, quite clearly he's on the path of accumulation. So he's already entered the first of these paths. So we, from our side as the students, right, it can be beneficial. We see him as the actual Avalokiteshvara Chenrezi, the Buddha of compassion. But in terms of his public statements about what he said about his own practice, it's that he's on this path of accumulation. And His Holiness has said that also there's hope that he can go from the path of accumulation to preparation within this life, which tells us that within this path of preparation, which is divided into small, middling, and great, he's already on the great path of preparation. Yeah. So at the point when one has that direct realization of emptiness, right, one is on the third of those 5 paths, which is the path of seeing. And at that point, when that path of seeing is achieved, then all of the kind of manifestations of samsara, they can no longer cause one any trouble or problems. And similarly, fear of kind of birth, aging, death, and so forth, all of those fears are also cleared away at that point. Then that's real refuge, isn't it? That's real refuge from fear, like on the ultimate level. And then within these 5 paths, the last one is the path of no more learning, and it's at that point that the actual Sangha jewel is realized. So the actualization, your own Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha jewels that you'll achieve, actualize within yourself, that's the resultant refuge. Yeah. And so then also the future Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, and Sangha jewel that we attain, those are our resultant refuges. Okay. Yeah. So those are the resultant refuges. Yeah. So that should clarify that. And in Nipadi, nganso dangzin dang dechap kepar kandesre. Dechap dang dangzin. So the question about the difference between attachment and self-grasping, if we speak about attachment in kind of its coarser manifestation, then it's easy to kind of identify a difference. But actually, as the attachment gets more subtle, it gets more difficult. Because the subtle kind of layers or manifestations of attachment, these are very much related to the self-grasping. Yeah.
아고서라
Yeah.
오늘 왔다 데버터 근데 손은 또 기지라.
Yeah.
오늘 dansesiglares.
So when we talk about self-grasping, let's define that as this conception that there is an inherently existent or a truly existent self from its own side. We can say like that.
나로서 다 예티 있다는 멋지 두자 통화이너래. 여보 통화이너 코로 미니 때가로래 선바.
Yeah.
아고서라 롱이니 때가로래 선바시오나.
Yeah.
대단한 말이 봤습니다.
Yeah. And also that grasping, that ignorance grasping at the self also reifies other objects. So we see that person is like completely attractive and good or completely terrible and bad, for example. It reifies everything.
니네서는 때문에와 노지래. 아주 때문에 때 그리고 자활로노라. 때문에 니네 파테기도 왔어.
Yeah.
샤야 파니츠 샤야고도 왔어.
Yeah. So it's a little bit how this kind of ignorance grasping at the self works with external objects. It's a bit like a movie projector. So if you go to, I don't know how they do it these days, but in the old days, if you went to the movie theater, if you went to the cinema, it would seem like the movie was appearing on the screen, but really the source of the images in the movie is the projector that's in the background.
다 대노지래. 아주 누가도 야가 강가로 소속 파조기 할 땐 대간도 하고요. 말로 스페니시 샤도
So we have a role, right, in all of those good and bad appearances that are manifesting. But the problem is we think that it's completely from the side of the object. So that's the ignorance grasping at the self. Yeah. So then attachment is looking at an appearance of an object, for example, like a contaminated object, right? Something that arises due to karma. So we know that any phenomena we see, it arises due to karma. Therefore, ultimately, it is contaminated. But what attachment does is it exaggerates the positive qualities of that object. So if 10% of that object possesses positive qualities, we add like 90% that has this kind of completely unrealistic, amazing, beautiful view of this object. That's the coarser level of attachment. Yeah, so attachment, like with material things, we can see, oh, it has this pleasant shape and appearance, and oh my gosh, look at the brand that this comes from. And then we have this kind of like completely unrealistic conception of how great the object is. That's a coarser level of attachment. And it happens with people too, right? That we think are beautiful or handsome or attractive somehow. When we first have a liking towards something, we have this habit of exaggerating its beautiful or positive qualities. That's really attachment functioning. So that's an explanation of that self-grasping and the coarser level of attachment.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome, Yolisa. I think I see if Julia is ready. If not, Rudy. Let's go with Rudy.
Okay, I got two questions. One is cause and intent the same thing, or is it similar? And the
same
other
thing as what?
As each other.
Cause and intent, are they the same thing? Okay, yeah.
And the other question is wisdom and experience the same thing? Is wisdom a byproduct of experience?
Wisdom and experience, same thing. Gotcha. Okay.
Are they dependent on each other?
Yep. Got it. Nanso gyu dang kunlong dinso. Gyu dang migpa dinso. Chikpare bes di tamboche. Ane nipa di.
Sorry.
Yeah, ko gyu dang kunlong chikpare bes. Chasamon gyu kunlong la tene drogi res. Ngachana de la tene chungre. Gyu dang kunlong chikpare bes di chikche. Ane nipa di nyamyong dang sherab chikpare bes mindrawares.
Nyonyo do shira.
So wisdom and experience, they are not the same thing, but they have like a symbiotic relationship, right? Experience helps us develop wisdom. But you could actually say they're assisting factors, right? So as we experience something, we develop more wisdom about it. And also our wisdom directs us to more experiences about it. So you could say they have a symbiotic relationship, but they're not the same.
나 원다고 다 된대요 알아봤어.
But there are some similarities. Then they kunong dang gyudi.
다 그놈도 다 간조 요인니까 기반으로 해. 그래서 그놈.
So in terms of intention or motivation and cause, whether they're the same or not, we talk about causes from the point of view of the kind of preparation. So on the level of the preparation of a karma, they're very closely connected.
인스도 이제 강가로 그로래 잘 노디라기가 말았어.
But not all causes are intentions, or not all causes are motivations. So it's not universal.
다 그놈 시타 비가를 칸이 다 로시 좀 뭐는 거 알아봤어.
But when we're developing our motivation, for example, at the beginning of a practice session, that's functioning as a very powerful cause. So in that particular context, they're tied together.
다 이나 세슈 좀 몇킬래 오지 지임발 그놈 몇킬 뭐요 알아서.
But there's many minds that arise perhaps without a particular intention or motivation, for example, due to habituation and so forth. And these still accumulate causes, even though we wouldn't say they're intentions.
Okay, getting back to the wisdom and experience, are they Are they dependent? Is wisdom dependent upon experience? Because
Okay,
I'm under the impression with an emptiness there. I don't know if I read it right. There is no wisdom. Is this? I'm trying to tie it in there somewhere.
Okay, I'll ask the first part first.
All right.
So sherab seria de nyamyong la tene chungorebes. Nyamyong mena sherab ke tu gyomares dilaw tu giris.
대우라도 말했어. 이니 맨이 년육계제요 말 빼나 마치 어때서나 거치지레다 라바 이니 년육계제요 말 왔어. 시라 대시비 시라 노동용 거 왔어.
So they're tied together, but he can't say that it's universally that wisdom always has to arise from experience, because there could be a practitioner who hears a correct explanation of wisdom, and on the basis of hearing that correct explanation, he or she is able to bring forth wisdom without that experience part there. Yeah. So they don't have the experience of using that line of reasoning or that teaching in their daily life or anything, but just from mere hearing, it's able to bring forth that wisdom within them.
다 이제도 다 세근 영화에 거도 다 좀봐도 이제도 던지고 거래는 나는 뭐 사니라 어느 것도
But with practices like love and compassion and so forth, these are brought forth in kind of relationships with others. So we could say that these are actually more experiential. Yeah.
So what's wisdom? What is it?
Then they should have said it.
시라 세나타 마리 바카리나 지 메바차니라 코치 네츠지 통소나.
Yeah.
시라 저기 왔어.
Whatever knowledge one can perceive that clears away ignorance is wisdom. In other words, wisdom is the knowledge that clears away ignorance. I phrase it like that. I think it sounds better. Wisdom is the knowledge that clears away ignorance. Does that make sense?
I guess so. No ignorance, no ignorance, no wisdom.
Rudy's like, I guess I have to accept that. Yeah.
시라도 대가로 쓰고 왔어. 마리 바카가 여러 바지나 나도 하마고 하고서나.
Yeah.
그 마리 받으면 왔어.
So Geshe said, think about what knowledge actually means, right? You might not understand something, but then once you understand it, you have knowledge of what you didn't have before, right? That's what wisdom is, understanding the way things really are in a way that you didn't before. And that's an antidote to ignorance.
마리바 주지요 세아도다 데레스.
Yeah.
마리바 라파산이 시오메오가 소린도 왔어.
Yeah. And also the wisdom has this aspect of clarity, right? The opposite of wisdom, ignorance, has this quality of a lack of clarity or a confusion. So if we talk about the qualities of them, you can talk about them that way. But in terms of wisdom, just thinking about it in terms of knowledge, right? Not in terms of teachings on emptiness, but just in terms of knowledge. All of us have wisdom about certain things that we do every day at our job and things like that, right? But because that wisdom was developed on the basis of an ordinary or worldly object, like how we're able to perform our job or something, it's not going to solve the problem of samsara, right? We have to have the wisdom of the subtle object, which is the nature of reality.
나로서 강에 저기
Yeah.
자와도 야라를 곧 내가시로 놓고 말아.
Yeah. So our ordinary knowledge about the things that we do, the wisdom that we have in our daily life, it's not going to be able to address that root of ignorance, which gives rise to the tree with all of the branches that trouble us.
다 예수 바시 돈이 다 시라지 보게지 레바이나 대레레가 나를 강에 저기 뭐지 내도 말했어.
But on the basis of practicing wisdom, the paramita of wisdom and the other 6 perfections together, we address the roots and the branches and are able to eliminate that.
In the Heart Sutra, does wisdom have a place? In emptiness, within emptiness. Does
wisdom have a place within emptiness? No, but we speak of the wisdom realizing emptiness. Now I'm confused by your question.
Me too. Okay, that's as far as I can go. That's it.
Okay, yeah. We'll leave it here for now. We can pick this up later. Are there any other questions?
So,
all right. If there are no questions, I see a hand up there, which is kind of bugging me, but I think we asked a few times and we haven't. So I think we can leave it there unless she's.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we can leave it there. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. See you later, everybody.